propose legislation.
It's to pass it.
It's to pass it. But what you've seen is a whole lot of people, the majority of members of National Assembly are not lawyers. So what you see is that sometimes they are given laws by people who just act as consultants. And sometimes they don't do a deep study of this and they propose it. You can see someone proposed a grazing bill law, which didn't make sense in contemporary Nigeria. You can see someone proposed an NGO regulation bill, which didn't make sense in the context of contemporary Nigeria. But that's because every member of National Assembly wants to say, my achievement is that I proposed so much number of bills to show that they've been active. But it is not the business of the legislature to propose laws.
But your own assessment now is that you would give credit to the parliament in Nigeria that given the ups and downs that they have tried. Some will argue with that and say, given the time they have done just as you said, the Fourth Republic, it may and should have helped them make considerable gains, considering the other part where the military took over. But that they still seem to be falling short of when it comes to like their oversight functions. It still appears they still have not come to grips with the powers the Constitution gives to them.
I think that they have not come to grips with the enormous powers that they have. The powers of oversight is incredibly mighty, but they are working against several odds. One is of an executive that protects itself. And you can see a lot of the inquiries, a lot of the investigative probes, a lot of the investigative hearings that the National Assembly has initiated, produced reports and given to the executive. Nothing has happened to it. The executive is unwilling to hold its own members to account. So ministers have complaints against them. The executive does not take action. Allegations are made against ministers of abuse of power, of corruption. The leadership at the executive level takes no action. And when the legislature takes action, the leadership at the executive level does not act on it. So part of the oversight powers that the National Assembly has is constrained by an executive that is not prepared to correct and to act to bring to account its appointees. In that context, it is difficult. If you had a look at the power probe, for instance, that the 7th National Assembly conducted. What came out of it? It even led to the National Assembly, the House of Representatives, sitting on a Sunday during the fuel strike to ask questions about what is it with the subsidy regime that we're looking at. And we saw that the country was spending 30%, a third of its annual budget to service fuel subsidy. We also saw that a lot of that fuel subsidy was being paid to phony companies that were created by the executive. And when they investigated this and sent it to the executive, that should have been very incensed that this amount of plundering of public resources was going on. The executive even had members of the National Assembly set up.
But don't you think the Constitution and general parliamentary practice worldwide takes into consideration situations such as this, whereby the interaction between the executive and the parliament should be able to work out some of these challenges?
It should be. It should be. The challenge with, both arms have their challenges. You have a lot of members of National Assembly that have no business being in National Assembly. First, they have no understanding what public service means. So a lot of them go in because it's an avenue to advance their personal interests and personal gains. But conversely as well, you have an executive which knows this, and when it suits it, it supports even some of these members that are derailing. When it doesn't suit it, then it goes into a long inquiry about who should be leadership of the National Assembly. So rather than build collaboration and use the powers or encourage the powers that the National Assembly has to achieve good governance, the executive plays on the weaknesses and failures of the National Assembly. And I'm not saying the National Assembly has no failures. It has incredible failures sometimes, But in reality, an executive that is purposeful, that is focused, would know how to harness this and use it to the great advantage and development of the country. But unfortunately, that is not going on. Today, the relationship between the National Assembly and the executive is at its worst. Not even during the President Obasanjo's reign, when the crisis was going on between President Obasanjo and Senate President Chubo Kadibu, did we have the kind of relationship at its low ebb as we have today. And that is sad, because it is the people that lose. It is the people who pay so much for a legislature that should deliver to them that are not getting it. It is the people who pay so much for elections to be conducted, for members of the executive, the president, the governors to assume office, that are not getting money's worth for what they have elected.
Let me take you on that issue. You said the issue of how the National Assembly has tried. Some will say that within this uninterrupted period from 1999 to date, they have tried, to build the capacity. Do you still feel there is something to do with lack of capacity with this National Assembly? Do you still think they still need time to grow?
Well, unfortunately, our political system also means, and we're keeping an eye with the political party primaries to see how many people get back to the National Assembly for the 9th National Assembly.
Yes.
The usual rate is that less than 20% come back. With 20% only coming back, it can tell you so much about how institutional knowledge doesn't get to the next legislature, how experience does not advance. And so each time you start on a fresh program of training new members of National Assembly, first of all, they spend the first year trying to find where their offices are, where the rooms are, the corners around the corridors, and the power interplays. After that, in the second year, that's when they begin any serious legislative work. And at the end of the second year, they are back to the trenches, thinking about getting re-elected. So in reality, you have just under a year and a half of serious legislative business that goes on. And this country can't afford this attrition rate of its members from the National Assembly.